Hello and welcome to Birth as We Know It. I am your podcast host, Kiona Nessenbaum. I have experienced birth as a doula, a student midwife, and as a mother of 3 amazing children with my husband and high school sweetheart by my side. After attending over 130 births, including my own, I've realized that each birth experience is truly unique. So make sure you subscribe and join me every week as we are guided through many different birth experiences through the lens of the storyteller. Please be aware that some of the stories can be triggering to hear, so feel free to pause, take a breath, and come back and listen whenever you're ready. With that said, let's prep ourselves to dive deep and get detailed about what really happens in the birth space. As a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and has no intention of giving or replacing any medical advice. All advice that is given on the podcast is from the personal experiences of the storytellers. All medical or health-related questions should be directed to your licensed provider. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Birth as We Know It podcast. Today, I am extremely honored and just ecstatic to have this amazing woman on the episode today. Some of you may know her, some of you may not, and if you don't, you'll get to know her. Today, I have Jennie Joseph, midwife and activist, who is the president and founder of Commonsense Childbirth. So welcome, Jennie. Thank you for being on.
Well, thank you, Kieran. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Yeah. Let's first start off, for those that don't know you, by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and who's in your family.
Yes, so I'm a midwife, and I have been a midwife a long time at this point, 42 years. What I do is always midwifery centered, one way or another, but I do a lot of things now around that, not just taking care of pregnant postpartum people and delivering babies, but I have sort of expanded that out into activism, into education, training, consulting, accreditation, and so on. So lots of peripheral things have sprung up around the midwifery, but the core is that that's who I am. And I think that's who I'm always going to be at this stage of my life. I don't think it's going to be anything different. My family consists of myself. I'm widowed, so it's just me. And then my son, my only child, who's now 37, and my grandchildren. I have a 13-year-old boy, grandson, and a just 4-year-old going on 40 granddaughter. And then I have a little doggy, my lovely Willow, who is 5. That's my family.
Beautiful. Beautiful. That is amazing. I love that your pup's name is Willow, actually.
Willow Joy. She's got 2 names.
Oh,
Yes.
that's so sweet. Oh, I
Yes.
love that. Oh, that's beautiful. And I love that you described I believe you said granddaughter, who's
Yes.
4, as
Yes.
4 going on 40.
Miss Amaya, she's quite the trip, but she's my
Mm.
heart. I delivered her in my birth center in the water birth pool. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life and career
Mm.
to be able to deliver my grandbaby. So,
Mm.
yeah,
Oh, that just touches my heart. I think that's so beautiful
it
because the
is.
dynamic is different when you are
Oh, yeah.
supporting family. Oh,
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, goodness. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about when you first started attending births, because you were not in the US, you were in the UK.
Yes. So, my heritage is my parents are from the West Indies. My dad was born in the island of Dominica, a tiny island in the West Indies. And my mother was born in Barbados. So, they married and immigrated to the United Kingdom back in the late 1950s. I was born in England. I'm the firstborn. And I have 3 siblings. We were all born and we all were raised mostly in England, but my dad was in the Air Force. So we traveled. We were in Germany and so on, and just all around the UK. So my midwifery education, I actually trained in London and I trained in a hospital environment. And I didn't know that there was any difference in midwifery anywhere else in the world, because my experience was, and anytime I traveled or anytime I researched, I knew that midwifery was normal for most every person who had healthy, straightforward pregnancies. And I also knew that obstetricians took care of complicated pregnancies and worked collaboratively with midwives. So I say all that to say that my changeover to living in the United States kind of took me by surprise in that I didn't do any research, that part. I just showed up. And I was horribly surprised to find out that midwifery wasn't actually any longer, anyway, a normal and expected way to manage pregnant and parenting people. So I say all that to say that I was born, raised, educated, and trained in the United Kingdom. And like many second generation West Indian families, considered myself British, Black British, and just didn't think much about any of it other than till I landed in the States. And then that's a whole other story. So,
Yeah, I love that you got trained in Britain, and I love your background and the story from your family and how it grew together and how you guys traveled. So,
mm,
I guess one question that I have based off of that is when you transferred or came over to the US, what was the biggest shock of realizing that you couldn't practice midwifery? Like, where did your mind go at
yes.
that point?
Oh my goodness, my mind went everywhere. I mean, first of all, I felt really silly because I just assumed the rest of the world, we look at America and we're like, oh, everything's here, like the land of milk and honey, the streets are paved with gold. Why wouldn't you be here? You've seen Hollywood, you understand the history, you understand all the story that is exported into the world about America, right? It's the most affluent and most resourced country in the entire world. So I felt kind of stupid because I didn't think to research. Why would you? I mean, I know Americans have babies, so like, what's the big deal? I'll get here and I'll jump right into doing what I've been doing for, at that point, 10 years, and I will just duly catch babies. And I actually thought I was going to work in the hospital as well. So that's another big thing that was totally not in my radar. I had been used to working in hospital environments. I also worked in community settings. I did home visits. I was the literal call the midwife of my era. We
Mm.
moved on from the 1950s and the 60s, like the TV show, and they would ride bicycles in those days. But by the time that was me, I was working in an environment where we had blue little minis, the mini cars to drive rather than bikes. Everyone knew the midwife was coming because you'd see a blue mini and you'd be like,
Ah.
there's the midwife. So it was similar. It wasn't much different. It was more modernized. So in the 80s, I was busy doing community midwifery, where I would do home visits for postpartum moms and newly delivered moms, did a few home births, and also I worked at the hospital at the same time. So
Mm.
I get off the plane. I came to the States to marry my sweetheart, an American, beautiful American guy that I just fell head over heels. Bought my son at the time. He was 2.5 when we got here. And Julie got married and just was like ready to live the full life. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was
Mm.
beyond shocked and very quickly discouraged. Much of the ridicule and snickering, laughter was, what are you talking about? We don't do that. That's old.
Mhm.
Oh, we've moved on. Are you kidding? Uh, and all the other types of responses, none of which were positive. And I actually became quite depressed because I was like, well, now what? I'm an unusual midwife in that in the era that I did my training, they were still in Europe looking for midwives to come on from the nursing discipline. So I was one of the first batches of what we call now direct entry midwives, meaning I wasn't a nurse, but I was
Mhm.
hospital trained. So at the end of my training, I was equivalent to any nurse midwife. I was able to work in the hospital. I was able to move up in the hospital hierarchy. I was the youngest charge nurse. I was at 22. I was a charge nurse, which is actually kind of ridiculous because I was very silly and immature. But nonetheless, I could catch the babies. I knew how to do that stuff, right? So I got started really early and I got promoted really early.
Mm.
But I didn't have that knowledge that this wouldn't be the same anywhere I was in the rest of the world. So there was the ridicule, there was the laughing, the finger pointing, and then also the shame. I'm just going to put that out there because I felt less than due to lack of having, for example, a registered nurse degree separately or having the college level credentials because, again, I was hospital trained. That's changed since I've left the UK. But in those days, you didn't do a university training for midwifery or nursing. It was
Mm.
vocational and you were trained on the floor, which actually makes sense if you think about it. because when you're finished, you know what you're doing, as opposed to you read the book and you hope for the best and you did a clinical rotation for 2 whole weeks. So that was where it sort of landed. It landed pretty sadly, pretty miserably, because like I say, I got kind of depressed and down. And I actually started working for an OB doctor in Orlando. And I was duped because that doctor, first of all, didn't explain that I needed to have some type of a license to work with him. He was Canadian, French Canadian. And also the doctor was very keen to make sure I didn't go anywhere near the hospital or have the patients imagine that I could follow them. He was very clear. You're going to stay in the office. You can check the patients, do everything else, but you are not to be out there, other than inside of this environment. I didn't really understand why.
Hmm.
I went along with it. I was happy to work. I was happy to get back into being with pregnant folk and get my hands on bellies and such. But I was not able to practice as a midwife. And I didn't even know, like I say, that I had to have a license as such. So a year went by and I began to notice a pattern with that doctor, a white Canadian, French Canadian doctor, who every time a very busy practice, packed every day. We had maybe 60 patients a day. It was just madness, right? And
Mm-hmm.
every patient of color that came in had to have 2 questions asked. How is your period? And kind of really like trying to elicit like, oh, it's bad, it's painful, it's heavy, it's clots or whatever. So the solution to that was you needed to go for surgery, or have you finished having your children?
Mm.
Mm. And so the surgical book would be run up and down the hallway all day because every time a person of color was in the room, could we get a surgery out of that person? And those surgeries were triple ligations or hysterectomies.
Mm.
Yeah. And so I had also had endometriosis myself personally. And I share this part because it's really an integral part of my journey in the United States. When I came in 1989, I was 30 years old. And I'd had endometriosis most of my adult life. I'd had quite a hard time with it. A couple of times I'd had some hormonal treatments. I had done all the things that we could think to do, and I suffered quite badly with it. So I explained to the doctor I was working with, I had this problem, and he said, "Oh, I can fix that for you. I'm going to do laser surgery." I'm like, "Oh, cool, new technique." And my husband was horrified. He said, "You don't have your doctor that you work for do anything on your body." And I'm like, "I work for him. It's fine." And so the long story short, 4 laparoscopy surgeries through the course of the year that I worked for the doctor. Each time after each surgery, I was worse.
Mm.
And at the end of the year, I went to another OB physician, GYN, to get a second opinion. And that doctor said to me, "Oh, you're in trouble." Showed me that my ovary was pretty bad with the endometriosis and all the different areas that he could see adhesions and scarring. And he said, "I'm going to solve your problem. You need to have your uterus removed." And I was at that point in so much pain and so distraught. I said, yes. I woke up from that surgery without my uterus and both ovaries were gone. 30,
Mm.
30 years old. And on top of which, he had already, and those were the days when we used the hormonal injections called Premarin. I don't know if you're probably too young to know about Premarin, but Premarin was a very high estrogen, synthetic estrogen that many women were on, which they pulled from the market after many years of trials of showing it wasn't safe. Anyway, I was on Premarin. My other doctor, the doctor I was still working for, fired me, wanted me back in the office within 2 weeks. He wouldn't give me the 6 weeks recovery. He was annoyed because he didn't get the hysterectomy.
Wow.
Yeah, deep stuff. So I say all that not to make everybody miserable or frustrated or annoyed, but to say that the genesis of so much of what I see happening here is based on these ways of being, these historical and institutional ways of perpetuating harm, perpetuating racism, classism, sexism, discrimination, maintaining the capitalism that is the healthcare system. And so when we look at our maternal health outcomes and our maternal mortality and morbidity, and we throw our hands up and we say, we just don't know. How is this so? This is how it's so. And we do know. And until we can really come to terms with that, we're not going to really make a whole lot of progress because we're running around like chickens, we're blaming the women. Oh, well, she was overweight, or she didn't get prenatal care in time, or she didn't do what she was told, or she's bad and wrong, or the wind is blowing to the southeast. It doesn't really matter. The reasoning behind all of this is must be something wrong with this person, or they haven't done what they should have done. So therefore hold the system harmless.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow, Jennie. So first and foremost, thank you for sharing that part of your story. I think that it's important to thank you in that aspect because that is a vulnerable thing to share. And I thank you for that. As far as working for that doctor and him expecting you to come back 2 weeks' time, that's just the tip of the iceberg for what many, many, many OBGYNs and physicians and the system, our healthcare system, expects of mothers or birthing people after they have their children, meaning
Absolutely.
they expect a quick return. They expect that, I don't like this term, but they expect the immediate quote unquote bounce back after a humongous life-changing thing. And also, how petty is he to be so selfish and to see you as just another bill to charge when you were coming in with so much expertise and him not valuing that expertise because of a paper license,
Mhm.
and for him to say, well, you didn't let me do it, so you're fired.
Yeah, well, and that was the modus operandi. That was how he was treating all his patients of color, because every last one of them, like I say, was off to surgery for some reason or another, whether there was a real valid reason or whether they just said, yeah, I'm tired of having this period. So this is something that historically, from a gynecological point of view, has been the curse of Black women from enslavement through. This is not new. Black
Yeah.
women were experimented on. The slaves, the most famous, of course, many, but the most famous are Betsy Anarka and Lucy, they even have a portrait, they have paintings of the experimentation of the physicians, the white physicians coming in, the masters, slaveholders, selling, I guess, opportunities to come in and learn on these human beings, human chattel. The experimentation in terms of the repeated surgeries to fix vaginal fistula, rectal fistula, which are really basically damage after having babies and having a hole or opening between the rectum and the vagina, leaking feces, leaking urine, all of these things that can show up when birth is obstructed, when babies don't come through well or quickly. And in those days, they weren't always doing C-sections. So this was a real big gynecological problem. And specifically, the white physicians were looking to figure out how to support white women who were suffering, who were
Hmm.
ostracized, who were unable to function once they'd had this happen. And so J. Marion Sims was one of the lead physicians who discovered, by doing numerous surgeries without anesthesia, with impunity, that he could not only repair fistula, but he could teach that.
Hmm.
And this has not changed. So one way or another, you'll see in modern times the perpetuation of those ways of being, whether it's medical students having opportunity to examine folk while they're under anesthesia without their consent, whether it's the propensity to induce laborers to make the commodity fit into the 9 to 5, whether it's, well, I need X amount of revenue to come through this practice. So if I do enough surgeries, cesareans, etc., I'm going to make my amount that I'm looking for. These areas have to be unpacked and recognized, and I strongly believe counted towards these supposed intractable outcomes that we are suffering, that we just apparently don't want to recognize the genesis, where they're coming from, but yet here they are in plain sight. And they have always been here. It was Fannie Lou Hamer in the 60s during the civil rights era who said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. That hasn't changed. We're still sick and tired of being sick and tired. And she had what they used to call the Mississippi appendectomy, which was having surgery for one thing, coming out of that surgery minus uterus, ovaries, tubes, whatever, like parts.
Mm,
That was a sort of an ongoing thing too, the sterilization without consent of Black women.
mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, there's a lot to unpack there because it dives so deep into history, but also, like you said, it is still here. It is still present. It is
Yes.
being covered up in ways that seem to be that quote unquote normal way of practice, normal policy, normal ways of
Mhm.
studying, getting
Mhm.
education.
Mhm.
So that is a lot to unpack. And honestly, that's the work that you're doing, as well as all of these other midwives and specifically, I would say, midwives of color trying to break this cycle, trying
Yes.
to help educate people from our communities and help empower people from our communities and remind people in our communities that agency of their voices matters and the decisions they make, the education they obtain can really change their outcome. And something simple with education when it comes to educating our communities, it's not, oh, let's sit down in a classroom and read this book or let's sit down and watch this slideshow. Education really comes through conversation
Yeah.
and
Yes.
being able to communicate like, hey, have you experienced this? Have you done this? Or watch out for this? Or hey, here are the statistics on this. We don't have to be the statistic. We can do what we can and what we need to do in order to support you to carry your baby full term and not have a preterm baby. So it goes very deep.
It does. And it's really hard. It's hard to hear. It's hard to absorb. It's hard to process. And
Mhm.
it speaks to much of the powerlessness, even with education. We have statistics that are clear. Affluent Black women, educated Black women, celebrities. Doesn't really matter. That's how deep
Right.
the systemic harms are built in, right? If you can be the most famous athlete in the entire world, right? And have, I can only imagine, more money than I don't know how many people put together. Likely
Right.
the best insurance, you know how that goes in America. You can have good insurance or you can have bad insurance, but
Right.
probably the best. And likely the most sweet and willing and professional doctor, and still almost die. And the only reason
Right.
you didn't die is because you managed, in this instance, you're advocating for yourself worked.
Hmm.
We can be very, very clear that you can teach or support folk into advocating for themselves, and that still doesn't make a difference
Right.
because it's only by literally the skin of her teeth that Serena made it through. It was that close.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was simply based on just not listening, not believing that a Black woman would actually be worth listening to or believing,
Hmm.
including a woman of that status.
Hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Deep
And
stuff.
that's just one of the many examples out there in the world, of course. But
Mhm.
that kind of goes hand in hand with the stigma that Black people don't feel the same pain. Black people
Mhm.
have thicker skin.
Yeah.
And the fact
Yeah.
that that was actually done in a study, that boggled my mind. Like, who in the world ran this study? I'm going to have to look up the name of the study because I don't have it at the top of my head, but there is a study that was shown that I came across as a student midwife that was saying that these providers were saying and giving some specific statistics saying that Black people had thicker skin compared to white people, and they didn't feel as much pain. And that also goes along the lines of, especially in birth, the quote unquote angry Black woman,
Mhm.
having to literally raise her voice in order to be heard at all. And that's a problem. And
Yes.
it's always been a problem.
Yes.
And it's something that needs to continue to change and be worked on.
I will add on there the fact that we've spent the last 10 or 15 years saying cultural competency out loud as
Mm,
the thing to address these biases, these implicit biases, explicit biases, that we thought that was the answer. And then we've changed a little bit and said, okay, we understand the difference in terminology such as cultural congruence or cultural humility as a way rather than cultural competency, because for the minute it came out, it was like, oh, well, you need to know that Chinese people do blah, 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 and Asian, African people do blah, 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 as if there were this like monolith in each cultural group. And all you had to do was learn it and then you were competent, right? And
Right.
so that's changed, luckily, gratefully. I'm happy to see that. But I'm not sure that we're doing really much better when we talk about implicit bias. It's a little bit more convoluted. And of course, it offers folk an opportunity to look at their own as opposed to, like, you could choose to look or you could choose not to, or you could even look and see and then realize and then just go on. And I do think what we really need to be looking at is not so much the individual, because we're human beings, but rather the structural and the institutional that say it's okay that you don't have to listen to Serena if you don't feel like it. Like, likely that nurse is probably still working.
Right.
Because institutionally and structurally, that's okay. So this is where we can do some work. So when we look at their studies, for example, a study that was showing that when there's a match, babies, mothers, families do better in their outcomes when their provider is a cultural match. You just have to realize that so many unconscious and subtle ways of being are actually life-saving, because the opposite is true.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what I call maternotoxicity, that's the name I made up for all of this stuff. Maternotoxicity shows up because of who you are, not where you are. Yes, of course, if you're in a low-income neighborhood or you're in a stressed environment or a violent environment, yes, you obviously are in maternotoxicity. It's not healthful or wonderful for you or your baby or your pregnancy. So you're a little bit into some toxicity environmentally. But I talk about maternotoxicity from the perspective of it pops up because of who you are, because of how you look and someone's perception of you. That's why maternal toxicity can be lethal. Not because you didn't eat right, or you didn't take your prenatal vitamins, or your blood pressure just poof went up all of a sudden out of the blue. No, it's because the person responding or people responding to you have a certain subconscious, most of the time, but often conscious way of being, i.e., your black skin is thicker, therefore, or you don't feel pain. So this is trying to just sort of point out, as we keep exploring and digging into ways to solve this miserable problem that we have, that we might want to look at it differently to how we have been, given that we're not making a whole lot of progress.
Yeah. I like that term. Is it materno or maternal?
Materno, I just put the O in there to make it more fancy, and I could put a hyphen. See,
Nice.
maternotoxic.
Yes.
But it's a made-up word. We talk about toxicity typically around the fetus, like as usual, the mother's just like extra in the way. There's not a lot of application of that kind of thinking to the mother. It's to the fetus. So we talk about teratogens, which are harms to the baby in uterus as a fetus. And then, of course, once the baby's out, the pediatrician is a whole big specialty of itself to then join in with, the baby, right? Dr. Stubbe says one of the obstetricians that works in the fourth trimester world and does a lot of work in there, she coined the phrase, the candy wrapper. The mother's like the candy wrapper. Once the baby's out, just toss the wrapper away. And yet we wonder why we have all of these postpartum ills. Morbidity and mortality is worse in the postpartum than it is anywhere else. The highest numbers of folk are harmed and lost in the postpartum. And that's because we don't care at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that simply shows up when people come to visit postpartum. They're like, oh, the baby, the baby, the baby. Let me see the baby. Oh, so cute.
Yeah.
Rarely had I seen as a doula or student midwife when I would go to postpartum visits and family was around, rarely would I see someone check in on the birthing parent. Rarely. And that was one of the things that I intentionally did as any person that could make any kind of impact anywhere, just even checking in and saying, how are you feeling? I have a lot of people, I feel like babies are booming right now. I don't know why so many babies are being had around me. Like my sister's had babies within the last year, and my best friend just had a baby a couple of weeks ago, and I'm constantly doing the check-in with them. Like,
Yes,
how are you
right.
mentally doing? How are you feeling? How's your body? Like, how's your relationship with your partner?
Hmm.
How is everything going? Because it's a full family dynamic. It's no longer just the two people, like partner, birthing person. It's a dynamic that survives. In my mind, I don't know why, but I feel like a family is like a mini ecosystem within the larger ecosystem.
It
So,
absolutely is. And you've
yeah,
you've hit the nail on the head there. Thank goodness you're standing in the gap because there isn't anyone coming.
yeah.
No one has really taken on that responsibility for postpartum folk in America. So, when I was in England, like I said, I would do home visits, mostly for postpartum mothers, and that was legally mandated. So the rule was that if you were delivered in a hospital environment, you might go home, and whatever day you go home, the midwife picks up and does the home visits up to 10 days postpartum as a matter of course. So what I had to do was be call on everybody who the hospital said they had sent home. And
Mm,
in my day, we were also keeping mothers in the hospital, first time mothers, 6 days postpartum, and then second time and subsequent mothers, 3 days. So
mm,
my role was to pick up, and I'd have a list every morning. Okay, this many folk were discharged. You need to start go visiting in your area. And I would go, and some of the mothers would be like 3 or 4 days postpartum, and some of them would be a week postpartum, but I would still do the visits up until 10 days minimum. And at 10 days, we determined whether they still needed visits or not. And guess who the visits were for? The mothers. That was baked in, right? They also mothers who delivered at home or in a what we called a GP unit, which was like a thing center set up where you had an early discharge at 6 hours post delivery. We would also go to the house twice a day for until they were 3 days postpartum. So I'd do a morning and an afternoon visit for them, and then a
mm,
daily visit like everybody else. This was 1980s. This was what we were doing back then. I started training in 1979. It was
mhm,
normal, right? So I had my baby in England, and I was first time mom having a baby. I was a midwife already. I'd been a midwife for 5 years when I had my son, and I thought I knew everything because I was a midwife and I was a charge nurse and I was Miss Fancy Pants, young flibbity gibbet lady, and I also looked very young, which didn't help. So a lot of the mothers that I would attend in the hospital would think, "Yeah, here, where's the midwife? Go get the midwife. You're not the midwife," and I would be so affronted. Like, how dare you? Because I'm the midwife. I might be in the disco every night, but I am still the midwife. So, anyway, I had my son after having spent many years teaching, we used to call them parent craft, childbirth ed classes, and tending to mothers both in the hospital and in the community setting. So I thought I knew everything. And I was so excited to be pregnant because I'd had endometriosis and I was told, you'll never have a pregnancy. You cannot conceive because your endometriosis is so bad. So it was an oopsie surprise. And I was still thrilled because I was like, ha ha, this is the miracle child on its way. So I really enjoyed my pregnancy. I had not a day of anything. Like it was just glorious. Those days we didn't have ultrasounds for sex of the baby. We had ultrasounds when you needed to have something, right? So I didn't know what I was expecting, but I already was clear because I dreamt about this child. I saw her face and I knew I was having this girl, but I had a boy's name picked out. But I was like,
mm,
well, I'll have to wait to see the baby before I can get this girl's name because we could not come up with any girls' names. So I knew that the boy's name was Luke, but I didn't have a girl's name. I didn't like Lucy, so that didn't work. So I was like, I'll just wait. So duly, I go into labor, and my first contraction brought me to my knees, and I'm like, oh dear, we're in trouble here because I've been telling people about puffing and blowing and just doing these fancy little things, and they'll manage their pain. And I was
mm.
like, oh, we got a long road and I can't cope. And it's not a good look. I'm in the hospital because people have babies in the hospital and everywhere else without any real particular drama, right? Because it's
Mhm.
normal and the hospital is run by midwives, right? Maternity hospitals were run by midwives. So I was having my baby and with people that I knew and colleagues in my field. And so it wasn't working. And I was yelling, and it was like, I'm out of control. And I've hardly got started in this labor. And so every contraction I vomited, or was heaving at least, trying to vomit. It was the most miserable. I went from a Tuesday night, my water broke at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, and I had my baby 8 a.m. on Thursday. And
Mm.
I was a holy mess. Like, it was just horrible. And I just yelled and screamed and railed and argued and was like, the whole shoot me, take, do something, the head spinning, the vomiting, you name it. It went on and on and on. And then I had him.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that part. You never do, right? As he came out of me, he was looking, because his head was backwards, of course. He was posterior. And that was why half of the drama. And as he was born, he was looking up, and I could see his face. I could see his eyes, and he looked me dead in the eye. And, if you could have like illustrated that scene, it would have been like the lightning bolt between the eyes, like just
Mm.
a locked gaze. And it was like, just some surreal thing that just transpired between us, where he was looking like he was literally looking at me. I don't expect he really was, but that was my memory of it. And we just connected. And I was also just taken aback because it was a boy. And,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know. I was like, it's a girl. I've seen this girl. I dreamt about this child. I saw the face. I know exactly what this baby looks like. And this baby didn't look anything like the baby I dreamt about.
Mm.
And it was a boy. So that took me by surprise. I wasn't expecting this boy, but I knew his name.
Mm-hmm.
I'd known that name since I was 6 weeks pregnant. So he'd given me the name, but I just wasn't going to accept that it was a boy. So anyway, Luke was born, and it was the most surreal, I think, from the perspective of being a midwife and also being a mother, all mixed in.
Mm-hmm.
I'd seen that over and over, I don't know how many countless babies and families being formed in front of my eyes on a daily, sometimes 2 and 3, running up
Mm-hmm.
and down on the labor floor, right? And to do that, have that experience myself was, I really don't have adjectives. I don't have language to match that feeling. But I've got pictures. There's proof. you know, I mean, I really look like death warmed over. I'm just like, deer in the headlights. All of those kinds of images have been captured on film. My baby breastfed without a single solitary problem, if nothing else. I mean, that was like butter, just
Mm.
straight to the nipple and no trouble, and never looked back. I breastfed for almost 2 years. But the thing about the labor for me was the not being prepared as a midwife, blindsided,
Mm.
no clue that anything like what I had just experienced was likely to be what I was going to experience. None whatsoever. And this was the miracle child as well, So I thought I was prepared. I thought I was like, I've got all the skills, I've got all the access, I've got all the support.
Mm-hmm.
Still. Mm-mm. So it was surreal and it was beautiful. It's still very strong of a memory in my mind. He's 37. And what happened to me after he was born, because I ended up parenting on my own,
Mm.
I got a horrendous, nasty postpartum depression at 6 months postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen in the beginning. I was back at work. I was going on about my way. My mom used to keep my child overnight, so I didn't have him with strangers. I kept breastfeeding, like I said. It was just totally out of the blue, just like the labor. And it it went fast. It was a quick one. It was all at once, like almost as if the 6 months had just sort of been on hold and then released.
Mm.
And I was not coping at all well, and got to a point really, I was suicidal. I remember the day I drove directly to the doctor's office. And my family practice doctor, everybody has a GP, family practice doctor in the UK, luckily, because universal healthcare, imagine. And so
Yeah.
I went rushing into the waiting room and they were like, take a seat, take a seat. And I'm like, no, I'm not taking a seat. And the person was like, no, you have to wait. You don't have an appointment. I'm like, I'm not waiting. I need to see the doctor right now. And I started yelling. And they're like, oh, okay, come on, let's take you back. You can see the
Mhm.
doctor right now. And the doctor was very, very helpful, intervened, got me therapy, got me medication, etc. And here I am. But it was also the wake-up call to postpartum is not funny. It can show, it can be gradual, or it can be that instant, just like that. Just like that. And so those experiences help change how I midwifed. I suddenly was not so keen to be flibbity gibbet Jenny running around on the floor being cute and just living my life. And what those families, those mothers said to me all those years ago was absolutely true. In terms of technician, yeah, I might have been a midwife,
Yeah.
but I wasn't a midwife.
And that shifted real quick, huh?
Yeah, it did. And lasting,
Yeah.
because it enabled me to really be and do like I think all of us that are in this work do, which is your lived experience counts, and your lived experience is what drives what's possible for change.
Yes. I agree with that 100%. Yes, yes, yes. Wow. So, again, there's a lot to unpack in that story. There's some questions that I have that I'm trying to hold and not lose. The first question that I have, we're going to go back a little bit, is you had mentioned how they said that with you having endometriosis, it was going to be hard to conceive naturally or at all. Did you see any impact from endometriosis throughout your pregnancy? Like, were they talking to you throughout your pregnancy with any risks
No,
that could happen? Or did anybody try to talk you out of having a vaginal birth with endometriosis?
no, we see, and I think this is the difference between the United States and the rest of the world. So never was there mention, for example, with my endo, that I would need a hysterectomy as an answer. Like the life-threatening cures were left for life-threatening situations. I had never heard of anybody having a hysterectomy other than they were at death's door or they had cancer. And the people that were having hysterectomies, my experience in London and Europe, were elder folk who literally had cancer or they had some uncontrollable bleed. The entire 10 years that I worked at the hospital in London, there was one maternal death, and I've never forgotten it. The whole hospital practically shut down. I'll never forget. In the cafeteria, there were hushed tones and hand wringing and, have you heard? Oh my God, this happened. We don't know what happened. Like nobody knew what to do
Mm-hmm.
because there was a mother who died during a C-section
Mm.
that had never happened before. I don't know how long it was because I left England in 1989. I don't know how long it was before the next one occurred. But in my time in that hospital environment, there were people who had never heard of such a thing.
Mm.
The entire hospital was like agog and talking about it. And the unit didn't know. The maternity unit was like all over the place. It just could not, nobody could make sense of that.
Right. The thing that I found interesting about you mentioning how the whole hospital was hush hush about that maternal death is that when it does happen here in the US, that does not happen. And I feel like the reason why I'm saying that is because the statistics show, well, I'm actually not going to talk about statistics because I personally don't know enough to say numbers and I don't want to sound like I'm talking out my hoo-ha.
Well, you don't know about it. I mean, I think you should
Right.
talk about statistics, Kiona, because we have a certain set of statistics that are, you know, matching what it is we want to have it match, right?
Right.
So the last 10 years, maybe 15, where maternal morbidity and mortality began to be mentioned and then counted, has caused a lot of consternation because historically we've never bothered to count. So now it looks like something's worse than it was or increasing. No, it just never got counted. And even now, we aren't counting. So I say that, for example, because if you die in the ICU, you died in the ICU. You died from a heart attack or a stroke or an infection. You didn't die because you just left labor ward and got to the ICU. Your death certificate is going to be hard put to find a little box that says, was this related to maternal? Because it's right. We are collecting how we want to keep ourselves looking good. So our
Right.
statistics are on top of that kind of way of being and thinking, right? If you go home from the hospital and die in the community, who's counting? If you die from suicide, if you die from opioid overdose, if you die from cardiomyopathy at 3 months postpartum, who's counting? So the statistics are relevant. So when you hear 3 to 4 times as many Black women are dying as white or others, that's just the tip of the iceberg with what we've actually bothered to collect. Likewise, when we hear about maternal mortality reviews where doctors and stakeholders pore over records and try to figure out what happened, when they finish figuring it out, they say, yeah, she didn't get care in a timely fashion and she died of a preeclamptic seizure. Which is it? The timely fashion or the preeclampsia? At the end of the day, she would have gotten care in a timely fashion if someone was listening. If somebody in the ER actually knew what preeclampsia was, because she's not in the labor floor anymore. So place matters. Knowledge of what you're doing and how you're doing it matters a whole lot from the perspective of the providers, the agencies, the risk managers, etc. Right? So the statistics are really important, but we also have to remember that they're not really accurate.
Right.
We
Yeah.
try harder each year to get them more accurate. And guess what we notice? They keep rising. And the rest of them that never got counted still don't get counted. And the families who lose their loved one don't get a voice to say or do anything about that either.
Yeah.
How do you advocate for your family if your wife just died in triage on the way into having a baby? Where are you going from there? Who are you talking to?
Yeah. Because the finger's getting pointed away.
Exactly. You're in the triage. Oh, well, it was an emergency.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, all of that is 100% true. And the reason why earlier I said I didn't want to talk about statistics is because I am not fully aware of where those numbers are right now. I didn't want to say a number
Yeah,
and have it not be valid, But
sure.
I definitely do feel that statistics are 100% important, and
Mm-hmm.
the navigation of getting the correct statistics and focusing on the correct things to count, when to
Yes,
count them, how to count them, and
yes,
labeling it as it should be labeled. And it's hard. And the
yes,
reason why it is hard is because there are so many moving parts. There are so many different socioeconomic contributions to the reasons as to why things end up the way they do statistically. Does that make sense?
yes. And it also has become a handy, another reason to move the blame across. Oh, social determinants of health. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, going back to what I was saying before, if we look at this structurally, there's only one reason that there's social determinants of health are so impactful in pregnancy and birth outcomes. And that is because we perpetuate them. We have them on purpose, and we don't want anything to change.
Yeah.
Likewise, we can call out social determinants of health because then once again, it puts the blame right back on somebody else. But let's talk about maternity leave, paternity leave, ability to sustain your family because you had a new life. That is not a social determinant of health, but that is contributing to the morbidity and mortality that we are suffering. So there's all these subtle ways of hiding and obfuscating and ending up with, oh, the statistics are showing this, that, or the other thing. Even if they weren't there, even if we weren't counting, it's obvious. Why? Because this has been centuries of the main approach to human bodies, human chattel, Black bodies, that is unfortunately the commodity that fuels America.
Yeah. That's 100% true. I'm trying to find a way to respond to that because there's so much there. In that 30 seconds that you just spoke, there's so much there in that statement or the statements that you made, and it's true. It's something that we will continue to fight for. And you had mentioned before that whatever change needs to happen or whatever change we are working for and fighting for, we are not going to see in our lifetime.
Right. This is generational work, but this is where I'm
Mhm.
also calling for a pause. My podcast is called The Perinatal Pause because I'm looking at, is that what has to happen here? Do we have to stop for a minute, stop running like chickens so that we can think and understand how we got here and why we're still here? This is one of our dilemmas. We need to move this needle. We need to stop this human rights violation in plain sight. And we want to act with velocity. And at the same time, as we rush headlong, we're not really getting anywhere because it's very hard to think this through from these other angles, these other aspects. When we make that switch to looking at this problem from the wider angled lens, we see the intersections of the problem. But we have an entire industry that runs on, don't see those problems outside of yourself, blame the person and stick with that game plan. That's the one that works. That's the one that's expedient. That's why we have to keep spending this kind of money to maintain and do more research and extract and keep looking outside. We're not really clear that the institution or the system or the medical industrial complex or any of the things that we don't really want to face is the culprit.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's why it's going to be generations before we make a whole lot of progress, sadly.
Yeah. And that makes me think of navigating a little bit back to the postpartum time where you were talking about how you ended up having postpartum depression 6 months after your son Luke was born. And the reason why I'm going back to that is because you had just mentioned how this is generational work, and it's the way that the systems are set up that is contributing to the statistics,
Yeah.
right? And so that makes me think of the statistics of postpartum, like psychosis and postpartum depression and all of this, and how we leave, kind of like the candy wrapper that you were talking about from Dr. Stubbe,
Mm-hmm.
is the candy wrapper analogy of we leave people that have just birthed a child behind and focus on that child.
Yes.
And I wanted to go back to your personal experience of, you said that you advocated for yourself by going into your GP office and saying, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
waiting for an appointment. I'm not sitting down. I need to be seen now. The statistics that are not being counted are also some of those people.
Most of those people.
Yeah. And they're going in, and some don't have the energy or capacity to advocate for themselves.
Even if they do, especially those that are already in some way marginalized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this country, being marginalized, unfortunately, doesn't matter whether you have affluence, education, or means of support. Marginalized folk, you can advocate for yourself all day long. I know I'm broken record here going back to Serena, but that of all the examples over the years that I've done this work in this country, her story has been the most illustrative of everything I've talked about
Mm-hmm.
because she was advocating for herself, obviously, because she's still alive.
Right.
Right? But she, left alone, let's say she hadn't or she didn't do it well, she'd be dead. It's that simple. It's like, that's where we come to terms with what we're really up against. So we've got a system here where you can't just bounce into the doctor's office and demand to be seen. First question is, well, have you got your insurance card? What's your co-payment? Have you met your deductible? Who are you? The doctors are over at the hospital delivering a baby. Sit down. And any number of, I could go on for half an hour with what the front desk people have been trained and told to say. And whether they believe it or not, they will do it if they want to keep the job.
Yep.
So if we go way back to what I was saying earlier about the physician I worked with, there was an employee who was employed literally to run up and down that hallway all day, every day with the surgery book. That was a job
Mhm.
because that physician ran that practice for that express purpose.
Mhm.
Right? So we have to consider that physicians' offices, private physicians' offices, are set up to be private businesses. Let's just bring the capitalism back into play because it's entrepreneurial work, right? And then community clinics, those offices are with groups of doctors and set up in a slightly different way because hopefully with more access for folk, but not really. Well, you've got to do the sliding scale application. Well, have you got your driver's license? Can you show us your electricity bill? When was the last time blah, blah, blah? Oh, you didn't pay the last bill and you still have a balance, etc.
Mhm.
You're still having your breakdown. You're in the midst of a crisis. So in America, if you are marginalized, what you do is not only expose yourself to that level of harm and discrimination, but then you also jeopardize yourself because, oh, you know what? You need the Baker Act. You need someone to come and let's call the police. You're
Mm.
not well. You're yelling. Oh my gosh, angry black woman. Let's get safe from you. We
Right.
need to protect ourselves. And let's take your kid while we're at it. Why don't we? Let's call DCF as well. Let's get those child protective folk up in here. This poor child. This is the unfortunate. And I'm making this a stereotypical response. I don't know that everybody would respond the same way. But when we want to do let's play monolith, we might as well just play it all the way. So when I talk about my model of care, my JJ Way model, the number one tenet, the first thing that has to be addressed is access. And I don't just mean you got in the door and someone said, go sit down. I mean access to the quality and safety and equitable care that you're seeking. Access, unimpeded. No one turned away. We've been 25 years as a nonprofit. That's basically the mission in a nutshell. Every person, every time. No one turned away.
And you get clients that come in all times of their pregnancies.
At the
Yeah.
last minute, we've got so many folk, especially folk who move into the area. No one will
Mhm.
touch them with a 10-foot pole. They are wandering the streets for weeks trying to find providers. Every ER says, go call so and so and see if you can get in. And you call so and so and they click the phone on you because what do you mean you're 37 weeks pregnant and you don't have a physician? Get out of here.
Mhm.
Systemic, right? The
Yes.
hospital has some sense of umbrage and frustration if you should present in labor without a physician. How dare you?
Yeah.
How untidy of you. How rude.
Right. Ugh.
What are you thinking? You see? Yeah, you're right. So these are the pieces that are lethal.
Mhm.
These are the pieces that are causing harm. And these are not visible because we don't want to see. When a hospital says, oh, we're a nonprofit and we take anybody, we don't turn anyone away. They don't actually mean that.
Yeah. And it's horrible because it's so true. There are so many holes and loops and jumps that people have to go through in order to be seen, you know?
Yes.
And of course, there's the understanding of an individual provider being overworked, but like what I mean by that is one person can't do it all, which is why we have group practices for midwives as well. You know, like one person can't do it all. And I say that because there are hospitals that turn people away because they feel like there's too many. I can't say this for all hospitals, but there are plenty of other ways that they can support that client or that patient to
Yeah.
get what they need rather than pushing them away and being like, you're not my problem.
Well, they like to, I think, again, be affronted on your behalf that you are a nuisance, that you're ugly, and you have a reason to be treated this way. You create it for yourself, and including you're the wrong color,
Hmm.
you're the wrong ethnicity, you have a different language, you are othered in the carrying out of this so-called care that is being offered to everybody else. But the othering maintains your likelihood of having a poor outcome. And that's where the human rights piece shows up.
Yes.
So we have a real dilemma because we really are unable to see or address what, it's hard for folk to have to admit that that's so. So we go round in circles. And we do such things as, yes, but we understand social determinants of health. So we make sure to let our clients know about the food bank. We tell them
Yeah.
about the 800 number so they can get support from XYZ social service agency,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the way we're going to solve this problem. No, it's not. So we've got a deeper problem. And again, I think as we stop, pause, and think it through, we've got more work to do. We can advocate for ourselves and each other, but we also have to be careful that we don't join in with agreeing that we should fix our own problem. Can't fix a problem that's as deep as and entrenched as this one.
Yeah.
You can't fix the fact that a 30-year-old person can go like the sheep to the slaughter and lose all the reproductive parts in one fell swoop. And no one has anything to say about that. No big deal.
Yeah.
Like, you can't change the fact that more folk in the postpartum are abandoned to complete just nothing to see here. No one is interested in you. Get away. Even if you have a 6-week visit.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, even if you have a 6-week visit, it's still hard to get in contact with someone when you do need help. What you do is you get this number and you end up calling the central hub or the operator, and then you are trailed along this phone tag system of trying to talk to someone who can help you get what you need. And the thing that makes it hard in the system here in the US is most of the time your solution is, oh, the doctor's busy, go ahead and go into urgent care or go into ER.
Right.
And then that leads the client to needing to pay all of these super strenuous and expensive bills for something that could have been resolved if the doctor would have seen them.
Well, I'm going to even say sometimes the doctor cannot or will not resolve a postpartum issue because what do they do at the 6 weeks? That's indicative of where the mindset is. They do a pap smear. That's it. If you score higher, if they do an Edinburgh postpartum depression screen or some type of psychological behavioral health screen, they don't have anything to do with the answer. They
Yeah.
wash their hands. They did the screen. They check the box. They bill. That's it. There isn't a referral to anybody because no one's in behavioral health in postpartum. So now that we have seen some states being interested in providing postpartum Medicaid, for example, for 1 full year, I'm glad to see it. And I'm asking myself and many others, I'm asking the question, well, who's the provider? Who is going to deliver this postpartum Medicaid year for a year? Because the gap still remains. You get 2 days in a hospital and there you are. Bye.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And if you get a 6-week appointment, good for you. And I don't know what it does for you. And then once again, bye.
Yeah.
My personal postpartum depression didn't show up until 6 months, but I had an access point.
And some people don't.
Most people don't. Most people don't have anything. Even if you have a GYN at that point, well, you're not pregnant anymore. So now you've got to bill your insurance to GYN. The nurse will set up for a GYN visit. The doctor will come in and try to do that said GYN visit. And if you're crying, it's like, oh, you need a psych. Go ahead to look in your insurance and see who does behavioral health. Have a nice day.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no access to the actual quality of care related to what's wrong. There's no equity in that care. And there's no safety in that care. Hence, we have a perinatal problem. Perinatal is around birth, before, during, and after. This is not about midwifery. This is not about the labor and delivery day. This is not about the positive pregnancy test. This is not about the 2-day, I'm leaving the hospital looking cute with the balloons and the flowers and the baby and the bassinet. This is not about any of these points along the way. This is a continuum of problems that, I'm going to say it again, are lethal.
Absolutely. And you made the perfect segue to bringing up perinatal because as you're talking about this, I've listened to all of your episodes on your podcast, and in your intro and even throughout your episodes, you're talking about the meaning of perinatal, like what perinatal actually means and defining that, because it is on all sides of pregnancy. It's the before, the after, before conception, just the thought
Mm-hmm.
of prepping and doing all of the things and realizing that the perinatal moment in a person's life is very long. It
Yeah.
is not, oh, pregnancy done. Oh, baby's here now, cool. Like, I tried for a month, that means I'm officially pregnant and now a pregnant person. It's so much more. And it's also the time you mentioned between pregnancies, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
My kids are 4 years apart. So, my perinatal moment between my kids is 4 years.
That's
But I
right.
have 3 kids.
Right.
So, I have a 10-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So, I've been in my perinatal moment
That
for
whole time.
yeah, and I will
Counting.
continue to be, like
Yes.
postpartum, the
Postpartum is
postpartum
forever.
moment. Yeah, postpartum is forever.
I have a 37-year-old. Postpartum is forever.
Yes. And there's always that saying where people should bounce back. Like, "Oh, you should bounce back." Air quotes all over the place here. And people don't even start to feel anywhere close to where they used to prior to having children until like 7 years after having your baby. And this is like they were saying that physically your body is not anywhere close to not it's never going to be what it was because your body, like your biology is literally changed.
Yes.
It has literally been shifted. So the reason why I'm bringing this up at all is just adding to the point that postpartum is forever and you literally feel it physically, mentally, psychologically. And it kind of goes to the point of when you're a parent, and even if you're a person that births a child and put them up for adoption or unfortunately had a stillbirth, like even though
Yeah.
you don't have a baby in your arms,
You're still
you are
postpartum.
still postpartum.
Yes.
Everything about you
Yes.
is postpartum.
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm just going on a rant here because I
No,
feel
it's
like
not a
there's
rant. It's relevant and it adds to this picture that we're trying to paint. And we're pausing long enough to be able to paint that picture because we can recognize, and I'm sure your listening audience agrees, that if we are just going to hone in on this sort of ideal bubble of joy, which is the American version of motherhood, parenthood, right? As if that's what we're trying to get to, then we're also doing a disservice.
Mhm.
Historically and across the world, culturally, motherhood and childbearing is deeply part of the whole society's, community's way of being.
Yeah,
It's embraced, it's supported, it's enveloped
that's a great word for it.
into the ways of being, right?
Yeah.
So if we have ourselves set on a pathway to let's just try to get back to bounce back to Gerber baby, cutesy commercial TV commercial version of parenting, we're still not going to get there. It's
Mhm.
impossible.
Yeah.
We need to realize, just like we do with Sankofa, the African symbol of looking back to go forward. We need to look back and learn and understand how we got here and then figure out generationally how do we change from one generation to the other to undo what has been so deeply put in place. And you're really smart to mention the impact on your body. If we think about epigenetics, if we think about generational transference, we've got a lot that we carry, and
Mhm.
it'll take a lot to get to the other side.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think one thing that people can do that's like a physical thing that can like have us look back and kind of learn from our past is we need to, especially here in America, I don't see it as much unless it's from I've actually seen it more with BIPOC families than white families is multi-generational housing, making that community
Mhm.
of being and having that support. And my home is lucky enough, or not even lucky enough or fortunate enough necessarily, but like yeah, I'll say fortunate enough. We have that in our home. I would not be able to survive the way that I do as a mother. I would not be the best version of myself as a mother if I was doing it alone.
Mhm.
And I feel like so many people in America here do it alone.
Yeah,
Even if they have a partner, that partner up and leaves soon after because they need to pay the bills.
that's right.
So people are doing it alone. And so I think that is one way for us to look back at our past and the history of or I don't even want to say the history, but just looking back at how
Mhm.
enveloped birth is around the world as a
Yes.
natural communal
Yes.
part of life. I feel like here in America, that's not the case. It's like, cool, we had another person have a baby. Let's clear this bed out, put him in postpartum, and then we'll kick him out in a few days,
Mhm.
you know?
Right.
And I feel like I was fortunate enough to experience having that extra support postpartum, to have some of that cultural aspect from my mother-in-law with having food brought to me in bed and me not having to go downstairs, and
Mhm.
being able to have that privilege of even having I have two cultural background I have many actually cultural backgrounds in my family. We are very multicultural, very blended, and I love it so much. There are two primary things that I experienced postpartum with all of my children. One was this Guatemalan beverage that encourages lactation, and it's super good. There's some chocolate in it, but then it's also just a whole bunch of like wheat and oat and all of these other things that encourage lactation. When I say my breasts were engorged, oh my gosh, I can't tell you.
Mhm.
um, and I loved it. And then the other part is my mother-in-law is Nepali, and she would always cook every meal that I ate with ghee, with fresh organic Nepali
Mhm.
ghee.
Mhm.
And it really changed. And I feel like this is kind of going off topic, but I feel like that goes into how the nutrition that you receive postpartum really changes how you heal.
No, it's not going off topic at all. It
Yeah.
is literally, you're naming the components that constitute safety,
Yeah.
quality, equity,
Yeah.
right? Those pieces in another world or in another space and time would be guaranteed because you're human,
Right.
not optional, not if only, not we'll see how we feel today, but guaranteed because you're worthy, in place because of your humanity, not even sort of a opposite thought than anything other than you must be centered because you are bringing life, period.
Right.
That's it.
That actually brings me to question how your postpartum was soon after, like your immediate postpartum, because
Mhm.
you said your mother was there.
Yes.
And how was that? Like, how did that
Yeah.
support you in those postpartum times?
It was the early days were fine because I was literally I moved back home and I did night shift. I was able to pump. My mom would actually, she had to spoon feed my kid because he would never take a bottle. He never actually weaned from the breast to a cup, but she
Mm,
figured it out because she was my mom, right? She wasn't the
right.
babysitter, right? And so I was very well supported. It was when I moved out and went on my merry single way with, superwoman schema, like I know everything, I'm good to go, and didn't work out at all.
And and so did you, after you did realize that you were in deep postpartum depression and around the time when you went to your GP, did you make a decision to change that? Did
Well, I
you go
couldn't
back
at the
home?
time. I didn't go
Mm,
back home, but I started going to group therapy. That's what they
mm,
recommended for me. It wasn't just individual therapy, it was group. And I'd never done that before, but group therapy worked for me too, interestingly. I mean, you know how these things do. I don't know what was the specifics about it, but I did group therapy for about a year, and I guess that became my community.
mhm,
And I was partnering with more of the single moms and people who had similar, and we made it through. We pulled each other through, and I came off of my medication and I went on about my way. But I think there was certainly the stressors that we take for granted in this day and age and at this pace that we run in America, you know.
mhm,
I mean, they give you, I don't know if they still do, but I've been out of England for 30 some years. But as a single mom, you got a childcare place that it was free. They would say, bring the baby. You didn't have to have a job. You didn't have to pay any money, but would say you need to go to the swimming pool and swim. Go have come for a coffee morning. All the moms, and hang out. So there was like a social support network built in from the daycare center. they were asking, have you done this? Have you done that? You should go for a walk. Like all of these supportive for the parent as well as for the child. Free.
That's amazing.
Because people actually considered that your child needed looking after as well as you needed looking after to be able to look after your child.
Right.
Likewise, in England, every other corner had a women's health clinic. You could get women's health care free. You could pop into the clinic and get your birth control, or pop into the clinic and have medical care because it was for women, right?
Yeah.
So these kinds of supports that are normal in most other places, in the most resource country in the entire world, with all kinds of, research and reason to actually have understood this way earlier and could have done something about it. There's a choice here to not act, but rather perpetuate what's actually expedient for a system that is built and is functional as it's built to maintain the status quo.
Yeah, I have said that multiple times. A lot of people say that our system is broken, when the fact is it's not broken. It's working exactly how it was built to work, which, yeah, it kind of leads me a little bit to the term burnout, because we're talking about single parents. We're talking about things that were in the UK for free that are not accessible here for free. That leads to burnout in all aspects of everything around parenting, birth, everything. And what I mean by that is that's burnout for the provider, that's burnout for the parent, it's burnout for just everybody. So I guess my question to you is, how do you feel or potentially relate to the term burnout?
I resonate with that term, and my work is based on that term. My work supports perinatal workers on purpose. I have an entire network. It's called the National Perinatal Task Force, where we, on a national level, are searching out each other, finding each other, saying, I see you, sis. You're out there on the front line, and we want to work together. We have our tenets for the task force are collective care. So, do your self-care, knock yourself out. But by the way, let's have some accountability to actually doing it. So collective care, collective leadership, so that we can learn to thrive, learn to grow. We are entrepreneurial. We're obviously invisible. People are not supporting us. People are not funding us. So we're just getting on with it. And so we need that collective leadership to help each other as we do our work. And then we focus on workforce development, the perinatal workforce. Those are the folk who are on the front lines in the communities. And those are the folk that are making these changes. These changes are not coming from the institution first. Remember, the institution is still thinking about, we need to bring lavender oil into the labor and delivery. Maybe that will do it. They're not going to change what they're doing. They're just going to mask and add a peripheral lip service to what they're doing. So the work is going to always occur in the community first. And the community is also providing the folk that are in the institution. They come from the community into the institution. So the burnout is factored into what we do in the task force. It is a support network. We are looking at changing this world. We're looking at transforming to what we consider a more just and loving system. But we have to do that by supporting ourselves and each other first so that we can survive it, because we are just as much in jeopardy as the families we serve. We lose our elders more readily. We have such burnout that it's not just discomfort, but it's actual ill health. It is high blood pressure. It is all of these things that, have us really actually be at risk. So that's one of the areas. And then the other area where I really focus on burnout is the fact that we can't build a midwifery workforce or a doula workforce without considering the level of burnout that it takes to get through that training and out the other end, the level of effort it takes to maintain a practice once you are out the other end, and then the level of continual aggravation, I'll just use that word, that shows up because of the lack of acceptance or respect even for your professional work. That's a continuum of burnout that will not change anytime soon, sadly. And
Yeah.
then lastly, we've got the fact that to provide the no one turned away kind of clinical and emotional support that we do through our services, the folk who are on the ground doing that work, those providers, go over and above every living single day. They can't just do the routine. Oh, well, you get 5 minutes, get out of here. Next.
Mm-hmm.
They are giving of themselves. They are sharing their gifts and talents. They are empathizing. They are listening. They're absorbing the vicarious trauma that comes with having to have their clients sit down in tears again and explain what happened this time. That is a
Yes.
level of burnout that is unmeasurable.
Yeah.
That's how we manage. We acknowledge what it is. We
Yeah.
acknowledge the reality of it, and we ask for help and support. Sometimes it falls on deaf ears, and sometimes we get it. But we're still here. We're not going anywhere. But this is
Mm-hmm.
definitely baked into everything we do. So we have two areas of concern: centering mother-baby family and centering the providers who take care of mother-baby family in the community.
Yeah, I love that. And so you just mentioned your National Perinatal Task Force. What does that look like nationally? Like how, for example, you're based in Florida. How does that look for someone that's here local with me in Washington?
Yeah, we have safe perinatal safe spots around the country. We just passed the 200 mark. In Washington, we also have beginning easy access clinics. And so I'm pretty sure you're familiar. We are trying to spread the model this way to build out the national network so that there's going to be power in that network so that we can all survive, we can all thrive. So, yes, if you go to the website, perinataltaskforce.com, you can see our map and you can see what's near to you or who's near to you. And even if there's no one near to you, we, thank you, COVID, we are now pretty good at our long distance, our telehealth, our telesupport, our, it doesn't really matter where you live at this point. Someone will be available to support you, to help guide you, network you in, help you navigate.
And so what does that look like for someone who is in need of services?
It's like the Underground Railroad. It's like, okay, you're here. I know so and so. Let me just see if I can connect with them. Let's see who they know. We are networking our way through this. And this is not a new program in that sense. Birthing Project USA, I don't know if you're familiar. That was one of the ways that earlier, was begun by Catherine Hall Trujillo, who organized stops along the way in the Underground Railroad for New Life. And that was with sister friends, mentors, big sister, little sister kind of thing. Similar ideas. We've done this historically for how long now? We just applied it to the perinatal. That's it.
I really love that. I think that is very important because it provides both the people in your area and outside of your area a way to access care.
Hmm.
It really does create that community that's needed during the extremely important perinatal time.
Exactly.
But Miss Jenny, I truly appreciate all of the time you've spent with me here today. I do just have a couple of closing questions before I let you go. The first question is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to all pregnant people as they prepare for labor and birth?
I would say that do your very best to find a level of support. So, starting where things are, you could, in your family or close friends network, who is willing to stand in the gap with you. They don't have to be expert, they just have to be willing to stand with you. So, I liken that to like, if your kid falls out of the tree and breaks his arm and you're flying down the street, going to the ER, you're on the phone calling, okay, my church member, she's in that hospital. I think she might be on. Let me see if she's in the ER today. Oh, my friend who's married to a doctor. Doc, who do you know over there? Like, we know how to network. We already know when it's an emergency. Have the support team be built out from the mindset, not to be doom and gloom, but rather to be ready to stand with you, to advocate alongside you. If you can find a doula or afford a doula, get a doula to do that, along with your family and friend members who are going to be standing with you. Have everyone around you who cares about you understand why you need their support. Have them understand what you have concerns about, what you are worried about, what you might even be fearful of. If you can find a provider that will listen, great. Not only use that provider, but share. Keep spreading the word. I found one over here who sits down with you for more than 5 minutes. Okay, share. If you find a midwife or a nurse practitioner or an obstetrician who is aware of the statistics, share. Help your other friend from work who's also expecting. Help your neighbor. We need to keep building out our networks of support. So it's kind of like Amway. Build your downline, build your team, keep sharing. Each one teach one. Understand it's great to have a whole bunch of stuff at a baby shower, but it's a whole lot better and safer to have the professional and the non-professional support teams ready to go. Not just for labor, like you said, but maybe to pop to the doctor's office with you so you're rolling deep so they see, oh, somebody cares about this one. I better pay attention. That's my best advice. Shore up your teams now. Don't wait till the last minute. Explain to them why. Ask them to do whatever is in their capacity to do. Grandma might only want to just be in the room so she can rub your feet. And as soon as the head's coming, she wants to be out. Honor that. Let it be the foot rubber. Find the jobs that people want to do in order to be there for you in the way that you need them to be there.
I agree 100%. And one thing that I think is important to mention here is that, you want people in your birth space that will actually have a job because, you don't want people that are just sitting there and distracting you and taking you out of your funk when you're giving birth. But it's so important to have your support people around you before, during, after. And I love how you mentioned bringing in professionals and non-professionals. There are people that just have life experience. And like you mentioned before, your experience helps navigate how you support people, whether you're a professional or not. So I love that so much.
Yeah.
As for the next question, what advice would you give to people that want to become a provider or midwife?
This is a difficult one for me. And I do try really hard not to dissuade, but to ask folk to, with caution, think it through. Think it through. If you've got a young family, stop. No. That's the answer. Just no. If you've got teenagers, maybe stop again. Think it through. If you've got grown kids and out of the house and you've got an opportunity maybe to look at a second career and you can manage that switch from what normal life looks like to this birth world, yes, that's great timing. Those are the folk who are going to be able to sustain themselves and the work. Very difficult otherwise to be able to do both, raising young families, teenage families, managing partners when you go into this work, because the number one question, the question that causes the most consternation, long-term memories, trauma, and angst is, when will you be home? If you don't have a good answer for that one, never mind. Maybe this is not the time. Look for the 9 to 5. If you're not actually in the labor side of this work, you can still do amazing, powerful work and be very fulfilled and support communities but also maintain your own family. So not delivering or not attending births, not being part of that birth process, but rather preparing families and then picking them up on the postpartum side, which is where we know there's a lot of need, has been really quite a revolution in terms of, perinatal birth workers can also fill in these gaps. They don't have to just choose midwifery or doula, but rather they're able to choose childbirth education, community health worker, medical assistant, postpartum supporter, lactation, and so on, and removing the birth actual experience, but able to continue in a career path. And this is also a pathway or a pipeline to future when children are older or whether more support is available to then go into nursing or to midwifery or even medicine. So we're really excited about utilizing the clinical space, the outpatient clinical space, to grow perinatal health work. And many of our safe spots, our perinatal safe spots, start out just doing support and grow into clinics in order to widen and grow the volume of people that they can serve.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that is really great advice to kind of put in the forefront of people that are interested in this work to know that, yes, this work is very amazing, but it is also very hard. And it's hard on not just you, but your family. The on call life is something that is absolutely insane because everybody is so used to working on their own time, working on their own schedules. And when I was living the on call life, I didn't realize how intense it was on my family when I was in it because I was in it, right? But
Yeah.
now that I'm out of the on-call life, when I was on call briefly for my sister's birth, my husband was like, "Oh my God, okay, what do we do? Like, where did the kids go? What about, like all of this stuff changes and the dynamic shifts of everything. And it adds a lot that was unexpected for me in the beginning. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm just on call. Like, that's fine. But it's also like, oh yeah, I want to go out to get some ice cream with my kids. Oh, wait, I'm on call. So I need to make sure that if I am going to go get ice cream with my kids, I need to make sure that I can come back and drop them off at home in time. There's not enough traffic. I have everything I need to go to where I need to go. And do I have food? you know?
Right? Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
all of that.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. And I like how you really emphasize how having young children may not be the best time to do it. Like I see plenty of midwives out there that do have young children or decide to have children after they've accomplished becoming a midwife and being licensed, and they have young children at the same time they're opening their practices. Um, so I guess I say that to say, can it be done? Absolutely. It can be done. Is it easy? No way in any shape or form is it easy. And I personally have sadness behind it because I had my son. I was pregnant with my son when I applied to midwifery school. And then I had him and I was doing birth work right away in the birth space, literally handing a sleeping infant over to my mother-in-law saying, got to go to a birth. And there was one time when I did 5 births in a week as a student midwife. And that was insane to me. Never saw my children awake because whenever I would come back, they would be sleeping. And the part that was sad for me is I realized after I had my daughter, who has been attached to my hip from the moment she came out of the womb, because I'm not doing on-call life, I've seen her accomplish milestones in her life that I missed from my son because I was in birth work. I was gone
Yeah.
for many, many hours at a time. So
Yeah.
that is definitely something to think about and consider. So I have 2 final questions for you. What is one word you would use for your own personal pregnancy, labor, and birth experience? And then potentially another word for how you view your career as a provider in this space.
I have 2 words for my personal experience, and it was eye-opening.
Mm.
For the provider in this US space, USA, then it is 2 words again, soul destroying.
Mm. Yeah, that's a deep one. That is very, very deep and very, very real. Very real. Oof. Okay, Miss Jennie, I have one final question for you, and it is one that I think will be pretty easy. What is one resource that we can share with our listeners on your behalf? And of course, I will share all things Common Sense Childbirth. They're going to have all the links to all that loveliness.
Thank you. Maybe the Perinatal Pause
Mm-hmm.
podcast. My goal is there are 4 million births in the United States every year, more or less. And so I set out with a plan if I can reach 1 million people who can understand what perinatal means, that may help us move this needle faster. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would love that people are curious. What is she talking about, perinatal? She must mean prenatal care. She must be talking about prenatal. And no, I'm not. I'm talking about perinatal. And we've talked today about why. So it would be maybe a way to reach more. I'm trying to build a movement to understanding, embracing, and enveloping pregnant folk in the perinatal and postpartum and so on. So the perinatal pause, maybe they'll listen in and help them see how this movement needs to grow and be part of that movement to grow we need to get back to safety, quality, and equity in the United States.
I love it. I think it is a beautiful resource.
Thank you.
It's really good. I've listened to every episode so far, and I believe it was your first episode. There was a phrase that you said that really stuck with me, which was, the healing is in the conversation.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Miss Jennie. I truly, truly
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Kiona.
I am very honored and very thankful that you took time out of your busy, busy schedule to meet with me today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, and good luck with this. This is really great. I
Thank you.
appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, I feel like it's as close as I can be into getting into the birth space right now,
That's
because
right. That's right.
that on-call life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interviewing Miss Jennie Joseph for this episode was an educational and eye-opening experience, and I'm sure that was true for the listeners as well. I am so honored that Miss Jennie felt comfortable enough to share her own personal struggles with endometriosis and postpartum depression, in addition to sharing all this amazing work that she's doing alongside others in the birth community. Miss Jennie, I thank you indefinitely for sharing your story and experiences with me, and for the wisdom that you are passing along to the generations that follow. Sitting down with you reminded me of how much more I need to learn about the perinatal time, and how I will continuously learn more throughout my lifetime. So thank you so much. Next week, I interview Kyle Kaz, owner and founder of Matriarch Birth Photography. Kyle shares two very different birth experiences with us, one of which is a very traumatic, unplanned cesarean that was followed by a healthy and healing VBAC at home. So tune in next week to hear the details on that. Bye for now.